where the digital space can also blend with the real, the raw, the body experiencing performances. I call Dolly often a cybersexual fantasy. Cyber means digital because, you know, the space where I'm also being seen and being experienced is online. Especially now, we all know the virus pushes us into the digital world. So I was already doing that a long time. Since birth of my daughter, I was teaching online fitness and dance stuff already. Like people do it now all the time, but I did that years back ago. So for me, I already discovered that the power of that space where you can show yourself in a totality that you're in full control of. But at the same time, I always aimed at sort of fusing that with the rawness where it all comes from, because everything I do is not a fiction. It comes from my real life, and my body is very roughly and rawly made, and the way I make my sculptures is just literally being with your hands in the clay and just almost being confronted with the full basic principles of what it is to create, or what it is to have things being born in your bare hands, have life be there in its gravity, in its limitations. So the Gesamt I represent, which is a word, a German word for the total or the totality or the unity, shows, I want to show that the differentiations people make between the digital and the real, or the synthetic and the organic, or between the cultivated and the cultural and more the primitive natural, that these things, they come together and are just a powerful unity. And on a bigger scale, I see it also like my life or my ethics are blending or are fused with my aesthetics. And this comes from my PhD and my philosophical research, where I started questioning things like, okay, we live in this world where we feel super divided. I'm a divided being. How can we be more whole? How can we be more healthy and at one with ourselves and with society and with other people and with nature? And thinking about that question, it is a very old question. And especially in the 18th century, philosophers like Schiller, Kant, and all kinds of Enlightenment thinkers, of course, Rousseau, and a little bit later on, Goethe, who is the main inspiration actually for my PhD, they were really concerned about these things. And they were looking at the Greeks, like the ancient Greeks. What did they do? Because they seem to be so in harmony with themselves, being athletes, being philosophers. So that is also very strongly a core base influence on being Dolly. Like I train fully naked, like the Greeks. And I just was inspired by what Nietzsche highlighted very much as the oppositions between Apollo and Dionysos, and how both of them need to be fused in order to have art happen. Like Dionysos is the god, stands for wine, for being drunk, for being chaotic, for losing oneself, for actually ripping oneself apart, while Apollo stands for rules, for measure, for harmony, for balance, for proportions. What art is all about. But good art, says Nietzsche, is fusing the two, having the wild force, the lust of life from Dionysos, being channeled and channelized in the harmony and balance and the measures of Apollo. So that's something what is for me a Gesamt, a good Gesamt. In my PhD, I was questioning how can people do that with their own lives? So in order to sort of express that vision, I literally wanted to do in my PhD what I was thinking about. So I descended in time and used the imaginary space or the bubble that is literature as a place where things could happen. I could meet Goethe in real life. I could meet Schiller and Kant. So we had conversations about all these topics. And I wrote it as a sort of a fictive novel, because in the world of fiction, everything is possible and there's no boundaries between time. So we had a very anachronistic meeting. I also invited Wittgenstein because he was the one who wrote this sentence, ethics and aesthetics are one, in a very mysterious way. And I was really inspired by that. So we had conversations about how to harmonize and unite all the different capacities that a human being represents, and how can culture and nature become at a good tension towards one another. I did not approach these things, so I'm getting here a little bit philosophical. I did not approach these things from a Hegel point of view, where he's creating oppositions, opposing forces, and then sort of in what he calls the Aufhebung, the sublation or sublimation, they sort of dissolve into a third factor. That's a different way of reasoning and thinking. While I believe that the oppositions, they can be there, but when they're in a good harmony, in a right tension towards one another, they're not opposing anymore, and they just become beautiful. And that's a term that Schiller used a lot, where he says the future of the human should be in beauty, in art, in play. When people can play with matter and form, with concepts and rough material, and when play is at hand, things are in balance. So to me, that was very inspiring. So breaking the borders and the boundaries, but having some sort of a tension between opposing forces and binarities. That's what the Gesamtkunstwerk of the future for me represents. And that what was Dolly as a living body who fuses life and art also represents. It's also the borders between the feminine and the masculine, or between muscle and soul, or between nature and technology. Yeah, this all opens up this space where things don't have to be defined or don't have to be categorized. And that's also, that brings me to one of the more final things here in this lecture. What does Dolly represent for our society? Because quite soon from stepping on the stage and being reviewed, people said like, yeah, that was a sort of a role model. And I was surprised. A role model for contemporary women or for the queer community. And indeed, queerness, queering things literally means also sort of turning things upside down, or sort of not thinking in binarities. I feel so honored that somehow this community embraced me as something to look up to. Very simple, and literally people follow me, or they send me messages like, thanks to you, I started doing drag, and I feel so good with that, because actually I always repressed it. Or someone else says, I'm shaving my head as a woman, and now I feel really like, yeah, why shouldn't this be a way of being a woman? Why should we always look like this or look like that? And just following your own, make up your own rules. Because when I was younger and before I found this solution that was Dolly, I also sometimes felt, or mostly I felt like I don't belong anywhere. I'm not like a real philosopher. I'm also not like a real ballerina and dancer anymore. I'm not a visual artist that is accepted or seen, because, you know, they often also describe my things as kitsch or too poppy, or I had the feeling I didn't belong to any kind of group. And I thought, why should there be all these groups in the first place? And why should they create compartments and departments? And very soon I was like, fuck all that, just follow your own route and make up your own rules. And I think that message somehow is really something that young people today, but any kind of person really can just help them motivate and nourish themselves from, even though it's tough for myself every day to just be there, out there. And of course I have all kinds of days where I feel like I'm not there where I want to be, but that's okay, because life is a continuous process, and a work of art is also a never-ending thing to invest yourself into. That's the beauty of it. So I think Dolly sort of represents a new life form, for an era where opportunities for liberation, because that's also very important, being liberated, also from the patriarchal structures, where this liberation evolves around the creation of imaginary places, and the place where you can escape something. That's why I chose to be an alien pop star, like a sort of a narrative where things can happen like that you don't see in real life. So yeah, for me, Dolly is already like not a postmodern figure, but a post-utopian figure or a post-apocalyptic figure. But I generally would say just a futurist, because the future is never here. So you just keep facing forwards. And also showing with and in Dolly the chaos of today and its beauty, and that things that are dividing us are also uniting us. And that can be seen on micro levels and on macro levels. Inside of you, you can feel divided, but also society is very divided. So inclusivity, which is all about here in this topic, is also about that. Like in Dolly's world, there is no distinction between what is higher and lower, what is superficial, or, sometimes my dad says, you and your makeup, isn't that just being so very superficial? And like, no, why are you making this whole division even to think that that should be superficial, or being busy with your looks? So the art I want to show also should be somehow, or that's my goal, mind-blowing in a way that that every single thing you experience from me, being it live, being it looking at a sculpture, that it's just like something you experience that something that you never seen before, even though that does not exist. I do know that, but and that it makes you feel alive, or that it makes you feel reborn. I like that, to bring that into the space. So that brings me to a last thing that I want to sort of, from my own experience, I might look very confident, but I also hope to stay very modest, because I have to keep learning too, every single day. And being confronted with the mortality of life and with death has really shown me that very much. Like we all are experiencing it now with COVID, I think, that we should be super grateful for the preciousness of little things. I was already living like that for a long time. We were already happy that we could just walk 5 meters around the block in the wheelchair with my husband without being in panic. So that brings me to thinking about, art practices and life forms for the future. How can they be very inclusive, or sort of cross-boundary, or non-binary? That is about shaking up art history and our memory, because the biggest factor in how we define reality is our use of language and our view of how things have been done in the past, and not about how we are thinking about the future, unfortunately. And I think we have to redefine the way we give terms to things, the way we talk about things, being it about gender, allowing the fact that we should say they and them and not just he or her, things like that. Shaking up art history in a way that, or history in the first place, they have filtered out a lot of things that did not come up as what is canonic or what is important, while a lot of things that have been overlooked were things that mostly patriarchal dominance has not allowed to be present. And I think it's very important to pull these things out. And when I was descending in time with my male philosopher friends, because I saw them as my friends, where I could have a real dialogue with, I was very disappointed that I couldn't find a female friend or a non-binary friend. And Goethe and Kant, they've written horrible things about women as well. So when I was going down in the past, I tried to make amends for that and tell them like, hey, that was not nice what you were saying about women. That was very short-minded and things like that. Of course, you can't change history or the fact